Hello and welcome to our US election special. More than 80 million Americans have already voted. That is 57% of the 2016 votes. According to a Reuters Ipsos poll, Biden is leading by 8 points and 51% voters are supporting Joe Biden. COVID-19 could be a spoiler in 13 states. Weekly average of new cases rose 45% in 2 weeks. Joe Biden has a safe lead in about 24 states and is winning around 290 electoral votes. Some swing states could change things. What would a second-term Trump presidency mean for the world? Our special guest today, Anthony Scaramucci, former White House communications director. He supported Trump in 2016 and was fired after spending 11 days as Trump's communications director. Anthony, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. My first question to you would be, you spent about 11 days in the White House. How would you describe that period?
Oh, listen, it obviously went by very quickly, but it was chaotic. I mean, unfortunately, the last 4 years have been chaotic. I worked for Mr. Trump on the campaign. I was a member of his executive transition team, and then I also worked on the inaugural committee. So, the 11 days in the White House were unfortunate, but that didn't change my opinion. I tried to stay loyal to the president for a couple of years after that. It just became impossible to stay loyal to him given the policy decisions that were being made and the racism and the overall nastiness. And then obviously, due to his lack of managerial skills, he mishandled the pandemic here in the United States, which really toppled the economy. So, but look, it's been chaotic. It's been chaotic from day one. When I was fired, it seemed like a very big deal at the time, but now 90 or 100 people have circulated in and out of the White House. And so the person that fired me, General Kelly, and I, the irony here is that we've actually become very close personal friends.
Right. How would you describe the president in 3 words?
It's unfit, impetuous, and I would say at times he's reflexive, meaning he'll do the opposite of what his aides are telling him. So unfit and reflexive. He's insecure too. So it's more than just 3 words. But those are the words around the president. That's the reason why he's had such difficulty.
Right, and you're right. You were not the only one. There are at least 70 to 80 top officials who had to exit the White House or because of one pretext or the other. What do you think led to so many exits? Was it the president's own personal insecurity?
I do believe that, and I would say to you that the only people left inside the White House are either related to him by DNA or marriage, or they have some kind of financial interest or political interest related to power. Guys like Kelly and Mattis and Tillerson, anybody that could stand on their own 2 feet, anybody that had their own level of independence, either through independent wealth or independent stature, long gone from the White House.
Right. Just to ask you about your own relationship with the president, have you been in touch with him over the last 4 years now, ever since you exited the White House?
Well, yeah, listen, listen, it's not even a personal thing about the president. It's just an objective evaluation of his performance as president. The last time I talked to the president was in 2019. We stopped talking to each other once it became clear that he's not somebody that I was able to politically support anymore.
And that's why you are supporting Joe Biden.
I am supporting Joe Biden. Yes, I'm linked up with the Lincoln Project and Republicans for Joe Biden, as well as the Bush 43 alumni for Joe Biden. We're trying to convince the American people that it's time to return to some level of normalcy. And we're also worried about the threats that Mr. Trump is making to the institutions of our democracy.
Right.
As you know, it's been well publicized. He's not necessarily wants to accept the peaceful transfer of power in the United States. And that's something unconscionable to a patriot.
Right. Tell me something. What would a second-term Trump presidency mean for America? How would you think of him in a second term? Will he be more predictable? Will he listen more?
Well, listen, he's 74 years old. You're not going to change President Trump. So, three things would happen in a second term. First of all, I would think it's embarking upon an American winter. He made the country sicker, weaker, and poorer as a result of the 4 years inside of the White House. And so you would get more of that. You'd have unnecessary deaths, tens of thousands, if not 100 or so thousand more deaths as a result of his mishandling of the pandemic. You're not going to be able to get the economy started. If you're going to allow the virus to rage throughout the economy, and you're going to be showing up with data of 80, 90, 100,000 cases a day. We have over 9 million people now that have the coronavirus. We have 600 deaths per million. South Korea only has 20 deaths per million. So it would be, I think it'd be a catastrophe for the United States, but it would also be bad for the world. He's weakened our global alliances. He's someone that has a tendency to denigrate democratic leaders and praise dictators. So to me, I think it'd be very bad for everybody.
Right. And with regard to foreign policy, do you think he'll do a good job when it comes to countries like China? Do you think he'll revisit his North Korea policy? They're exchanging letters. They speak about great letters that they're talking about. But do you think there will be more predictability in foreign policy or not at all?
Well, listen, I don't think there'll be any predictability. You're talking about the North Korean situation. Nothing came of that. There was a lot of bombast and bluster. Ultimately, the North Koreans are continuing to grow their nuclear arsenal. And so it really didn't have a successful outcome. I would also say, as it relates to the Chinese situation, we may have trade differences, then there may need to be an evening in the trade situation. But I don't think the bellicosity of the rhetoric, the bullying, the flippant impetuosity is winning any fans globally. It's not the right way to treat allies. It's not, frankly, the right way to treat adversaries. So to me, we need a strong bilateral relationship with China. We have to recognize that we're going to be part of the earth together. The America First strategy is ultimately turning out to be an America Alone strategy. And that'll be dangerous to the world. The president has disavowed the David Ricardo principle of global trade.
Right. But would you write him off just yet, Anthony?
No, I'm not writing him off. I'm out there working every day. We have 4 days left until the election. Definitely would not write him off. There's a path for him to win the presidency. Many people feel that the polls are not necessarily accurate. I think he's going to get crushed on Tuesday. And I'm not just talking my book. I'm just looking at the data as a money manager. You have 25 million additional voters this time versus last time. And so the predominant voter in this country is an independent, followed by Democrats, and the smaller group of people would categorize themselves as Republicans.
Right. You're perhaps one of the few people, we've of course heard from John Bolton as well in the past, who've come out, who've spoken about their experiences in the White House. Do you think this coronavirus pandemic and how Trump treated his own illness has left many White House staffers angry? And if he loses power next week, there will be many more people who might be wanting to come out and tell their stories to the world?
Yes. Listen, I mean, look, he's one of the more powerful, if not the most powerful person in the world. And so it is intimidating to a large group of people to speak the truth related to a person that has that level of power. But, I'm hoping that there will be a reckoning and eventually a reconciliation inside the Republican Party. But yes, I do think people will be out there speaking out.
Right. This election is going to boil down to a couple of states. Which states, according to you, will matter in this election if Donald Trump has to return to power?
Well, listen, there's only one real path for him to win the election. He's got to win Florida and Pennsylvania. And then obviously, if he does that, he still needs Arizona or one of the northern Midwestern states. That would be Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Michigan. And so if you look at the polling data there, that is going to be a hard thing for him to do. Now, is it possible? Certainly. He won last time by 78,000 votes. It was a narrow election. One of the things that he's not been able to do is have a popular presidency. He's never been over 50% if you look at the weighted average approval ratings.
Right. Would you still call him an astute politician because he managed to impress the American voter in 2016? He managed to make it to the White House. And would you say that he has been preparing from 2020 since the time he entered White House and was sworn in for the first time?
Well, listen, he has incomparable political instincts. You can't go from being a reality television star to 17 short months later, you're arriving into the American presidency. And so I applaud him for that. You may remember this. He announced his reelection on the day that he was sworn in, January 20th of 2017. And that gave him the opportunity to raise tremendous amounts of money. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what happened to that money? Usually the incumbent has more money to spend than the challenger. It seems like a lot of that money was wasted, or let's just call it misplaced. So yes, he's been preparing himself for 2020, but if you don't have the right managerial skills or the right temperament for the job, when you get hit with a crisis, and in this case, the COVID-19 crisis, you could see that paralyzed the executive branch. And I think that will be his undoing. Ultimately, I think people will look back after he loses, they'll say, wow, he lost because he really couldn't handle or manage that crisis.
All right, on that note, we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We will talk about the possible legal challenges to the election result. We will have with us Professor of Law at University of Kentucky, Joshua Douglas, with us. And also, we'll tell you about the Ipsos survey about how Indians view Donald Trump. We will have the Managing Director of Ipsos India with us, Amit Adarkar, shortly. Welcome back to our special coverage of the U.S. elections. In a major development, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed key swing states of Pennsylvania, North Carolina to accept absentee ballots for several days after the election. In the case of absentee ballots in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court has extended the deadline by 3 days after the polls, while for North Carolina, the court has allowed an extension of 9 days. Although the move has been welcomed by Democrats, there is a fear that the result could be challenged if the margin of victory is close. Another concern is that Amy Coney Barrett, a Republican nominee who was recently confirmed as a Supreme Court judge, could preside over election-related cases after the 3rd of November. We are joined by Joshua Douglas, Professor of Law at the University of Kentucky. Professor Douglas, thank you very much for joining us. My first question to you, do you think there could be some legal challenges if this result is close? It's being written about a lot in the US media right now.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's possible. I don't think it's likely unless the perfect storm occurs where you have a very close election in one or more key states and the Electoral College would come down to those states. You know, we don't elect the president directly. We elect through the Electoral College, so each state's votes make a big difference. You know, the big concern is if it comes down to a state like Pennsylvania, where the winner of Pennsylvania wins the Electoral College and the margin of victory in that state is very close, then I think we would see some post-election litigation. But again, that only will happen if the votes are very close.
Right. Amy Coney Barrett, her confirmation to the Supreme Court, do you think it will have a major impact on post-election politics in the immediate term?
I mean, it's possible. Again, you know, we're talking about small probability because this only would occur in a very close election. But the cases that you just mentioned out of North Carolina and Pennsylvania, she did not vote in. And the Supreme Court said it was because she had just been confirmed and didn't have time to be up to speed in the legal arguments and the briefings. That leaves the door open for her to participate in a post-election dispute if it were to reach the court. Now, remember that an election dispute wouldn't automatically go to the U.S. Supreme Court. It would work its way through the lower courts first. And so there's an open question, even if we were in post-election litigation, as to whether the Supreme Court would even take a case. But if it does, Justice Barrett, I think, would probably participate.
Right. Also, to speak to you about Donald Trump, though he has given an indication that he will accept the election result, do you think if the results in places like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, they are challenged because those cases are still pending in the Supreme Court, How much could it delay the election result, and could there be a major change as a result of those cases?
Well, I'm very concerned about President Trump undermining the legitimacy of the American election by continuing to peddle falsehoods, continuing to lie about the possibility of voter fraud or the security of mail-in balloting. And he's doing it to plant the seeds for a potential election challenge if he loses. So the question then becomes, if the vote is close, how long does a post-election dispute last? One thing to remember is that election night totals are never official. Election night results are simply a media projection based on what we know. And it's quite possible that we won't be able to make a definitive media projection this year because of the increase in mail-in balloting. And those take a lot of time. And especially in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, those states are not allowed to start even the process of opening them and getting them ready to count until next week. And so, we may be delayed in how long we find out about the actual winner. And then if the election is contested, that could draw this out even further. But there's never an official result on election night, and we all need to remember that.
Right. Professor Douglas, thank you so much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18 and explaining us post-election scenarios and what they may look like. Moving on, Indians comprise the highest percentage of people favoring Trump to win the election, says a survey of 18,500 respondents across 25 countries. In the survey conducted by Ipsos, 36% of Indians say Trump will win the election. To discuss this further, with me today is Amit Adarkar, Managing Director of Ipsos India.
Thank you for having me, Parikshit. Pleasure to be here. So it's quite interesting because, as you rightly mentioned, there's an overwhelming majority of Indians who push the case for Trump as compared to, other 24-odd countries. There are multiple reasons of, explaining this, and some of it is based on the research that we've done. I think Trump was always a familiar face for Indians, even before his first term, because of his real estate interests. And over the last 4 years of presidency, some of the posturing and actions that he has taken, for example, he's seen to be tough on terror. He's also seen to be tough on China. And obviously, given the current crisis this year, post-Galwan, some of these messages do resonate well with Indians. Even the US participation in the latest Quad initiative. So I think all these messages somehow give a sense to Indians that he's somebody that they can, look up to in moments of crisis. The other reason is that obviously there's a lot of bonhomie between our own Prime Minister and President Trump. Whether you look at Howdy Modi, whether you look at Namaste Trump, all these initiatives go a long way in building credibility and stature. And that has obviously helped a lot.
Right.
And the third point, which is critical, because when I look at the data in multiple other countries, in other countries, the sort of support for Biden is much, much higher than Trump, unlike in India. And I think the critical thing to understand is that some of the issues under which, Trump is getting a fair amount of negative publicity. For example, issues like the way he's handling BLM, Black Lives Matter campaign,
right,
or even his way of handling the COVID crisis in the US. These issues for most of the Indians, they are really far from their day-to-day sort of happenings, unlike some of American or Latin American.
What were some of the concerns, Amit?
The negatives sort of to that extent, not really resonate. And he's seen to that extent offer a lot of positivity.
Okay, what were some of the concerns among Indians that you surveyed, Amit?
That's right. So we actually, when this went to around 24 countries, and India was one of them, and we looked at the data across countries to see how the mood is against the current incumbent in relation to Joe Biden in India as well as other countries.
Right. Also to ask you about reasons for supporting Joe Biden. Right now, the number of Indians who are supporting Donald Trump, that's a little higher, but what would be the reasons for supporting Joe Biden?
Well, actually, it's quite fascinating because some of the work that we've done, it shows that Trump as a brand, and if I look at it from a slightly marketing perspective, not really a politics perspective, Trump as a brand has sharp positives and negatives. And obviously, as I explained, some of the positives have resonated well with Indians, and negatives haven't actually they're not really relevant. In contrast, Biden as a brand is seen to be a bit diffused, and a lot of positivity for Biden comes as a bit of a mirror image of what Trump is disliked for. And because, Trump, the negatives associated with President Trump, they don't really resonate that well. To that extent, I think Biden, sort of benefits, but and he gets some support, but not to the same extent as, around 20 odd other countries that we did research in. So there is positivity, but, in terms of the absolutes, Trump has an edge, clearly from an India perspective.
All right, Amit, thank you so much for joining us, telling us how Indians think of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of US Votes. Many thanks for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18. News and updates continue on the other side.